In this section, Lofink points out that the gathering of God's scattered people, the gathering of the scattered people of God, has been a major, a fundamental statement in Israel's theology since the Babylonian exile. He cites chapter 30 of Deuteronomy, right, where they talk about gathering the people back together that have been dispersed to the farthest corners of the earth, right? And the writer says, even from there the Lord will gather you, right, and bring you back. He'll bring you back to the land your ancestors possessed, and you'll have the land back again. And he'll make you more prosperous and numerous than before, right? It's going to be even better when they come back, when they're gathered together and brought back to the land, right? And this time the Lord is going to circumcise their hearts. That means it's not just going to be an external sign, right? They're just not going to follow the covenant externally. The exile is actually going to help them, right? That's the idea. And so that their hearts will now be in it, and that they'll actually love the Lord. It won't just be external signs of religiosity that Lofink talks about. They're really going to live it. It's going to be that new society that God promised Abraham, right? With your whole heart and your whole being, that you can live. Again, what are they talking about? They're talking about salvation. They're talking about the dream here. They're talking about what God is introducing to the world through Abraham. Better way of life. So we see the Babylonian exile wasn't the end of Israel. If it learns and repents, right, this is what the prophet's talking about. This is what the Deuteronomistic writer is getting at, right? God will bring it back to the land, form a new covenant, big theme in Jeremiah. And again, a better one, not external, one of the heart, one where they really live as the people of God. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, they all talk about this gathering of Israel from those who were scattered. And the scattering was the Babylonian exile. And also, though, the northern tribes, the other tribes, right? They were not part of Judah. They were scattered too. There's some sense that they are also going to be restored. Gathering, kibbutz, becomes a technical term for the bringing of salvation. All right, you see, Hebrew doesn't have vowels, so a lot of times you'll see there's Hebrew words, and people debate how they were pronounced because there are no vowels, right? So we'll go with kibbutz, like in kibbutz, right? A Jewish communal society, or neighborhood or community. Now, when the people are gathered back together, it's not their own initiative or by their own leadership. God brings them together. And the metaphor that we're familiar with is a shepherd, right? Like a shepherd gathers his flock. That's the way it works. The sheep aren't coming together by themselves. They're wandering off. The shepherd has to come bring back together. And this theme becomes so strong that it actually becomes parallel to the work of God in Exodus, right? As Jeremiah writes about it. Right? The days are coming when they won't say, as the Lord lives who brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, but as the Lord lived who brought the descendants of the house of Israel up from the land of the north. Right? And from the land which I banished them, brought them back, and they'll live there again. So they're really this gathering of the people from the exile and diaspora, how they're spread all over the earth after the exile. This is becoming just as big as the foundational event of the Israelites, the Exodus, when God freed them from slavery in Egypt. And when they come back together, there's going to be a healing, right? I said this is for the northern tribes too, right? So, you know that the north and south split after the reign of Solomon. And so by the time the exile comes, the northern tribes have already been defeated by the Syrians, and the southern tribes and the northern tribes have been split for hundreds of years. But when God restores, when God brings them back from the exile, he'll bring the nation together. He'll heal it You see, people who were split apart, they'll be brought back together. Again, there won't be that mistrust. There'll be community instead. There'll be a family again, right? Remember, this was Lofink's whole vision of what sin and what salvation is. Right? Mistrust, that's the basis of sin. Being open to trusting, loving, caring for others. That's the new society. That's the salvation. That's the promised land. That's the Garden of Eden. That's the new city of Jerusalem. And that is the new Israel after the Jews learn their lesson in the exile. The aim of the gathering is reconciliation. The gathering is reconciliation. You're coming back together, right? Like what are you coming back together? You're reconciling right there. It's part of it. You know, if you've ever had a break with someone, right? If you ever had a stress in a relationship, or with a group of people, right? Or you've been part of one group that is split from another group. How does it come back? Well, you come back together. That is reconciliation in itself. Hey, let's get back together and do what we used to do. Let's be one group again. In this case, let's be one family again. Let's be one people. Here's the same theme in Ezekiel. Right? The gathering together is also reconciliation. It's a restoration of the true community, of the free society, right? The new and better life. Jesus, no surprise, right? Jesus was Jewish. He uses the same language and metaphor. Now, he's not talking about the exact same thing, but the symbolism, just like the Exodus, right? Freedom from slavery has become so strong, such a big part of the tradition, that it can be applied in different ways. And Lofink's going to say one of the reasons that is because that's how Israel was formed. It goes back to the foundation, this idea of salvation being equated with gathering together, right? That's how we are saved. Again, it makes sense when you understand what Lofink is talking about as salvation. You know, what paradise is. What redemption, what liberation, what justification all involves. Coming back into community, a community of trust. So, in the Bible, in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, you have the story of these 12 tribes that are the 12 sons of one guy, right? Jacob / Israel, right? Whose grandfather was Abraham. That's metaphorical, right? Think about it. Like in the Bible, they're all in one. They're all in Egypt, and then they all just leave together. Like they're just together the whole time in the desert. Then they all go into Israel together. It doesn't sound very realistic, you know. I mean, if you just think about the history of the world. But Lofink says it was supposed to function as a metaphor, right? Because when we look at Judges in the Bible, it gives a different picture. You know, there's different views on this. There's different histories about how the Israelites came to be in the Bible itself. And Judges doesn't give this, 12 sons of Jacob all hanging out together for, 400 years in Egypt and then busting out together and going through the desert together for 40 years and then doing a military conquest of Israel under Joshua. Right? Judges tells the story a little differently, right? Or a lot differently. Archaeological evidence also tells a different story. So this idea of gathering is essential to the very foundations of the Israelite people. If you look at like how it seems that they actually formed, not the symbolic story that we see in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, which, by the way, is a good metaphor, because what they're saying is that all these different people, we'll see, that actually made up the Israelites, they're all one family, right? It's like an ethos. It's like a way that they're talking about themselves. You know, they would have known, you know, that it was a metaphor. So we already went over the historical background of the archaeology and akin to Judges when we look at the Yahwist writers, right? So you remember had in the period of around 1200, 1250 BC, you had this decline of the Egyptian-dominated Canaanite city-states. And these peasant farmers who were heavily taxed and forced into military service by the city-states, they were like, we're out of here. And they just went off and they started, you know, they settled in the hills and they built roads like they knew how to, and they built the Israelite house like they knew how to, and they farmed like they knew how to. You know, they were kind of safe up there because the chariots of the Canaanites and the Egyptians and the other threats that they faced, the other big state systems that they faced, they couldn't get up there. You know, so they were kind of left alone. Wasn't really worth going after them or anything. And they farmed, right? And then you had groups coming in from the desert, and also, you know, herding groups that lived throughout Canaan, and maybe some other groups like you know, marauders and different tribes. You can kind of hear the roots of these people if you read through Judges. You kind of see, you can hear the different stories, and you kind of understand, oh, the Israelites are living like this now, and this tribe's living like this now, and this tribe's living like that. You kind of can see the roots of the people. But anyway, they end up, you know, sharing an identity, right, and becoming the 12th tribe of Israel. And that identity is the one that's brought from the group, the Moses group, we'll call them, who it looks like, you know, it could be an actual group that came from Egypt, that actually escaped from Egypt, right? Not just talking about escape from Egypt as a symbol of the Canaanite city-states, like a lot of scholars used to think. But now a lot of scholars are kind of moving, saying, well, now actually look at these some of these elements, including the name Yahweh from the Midianites, which are traditionally the enemies of the Israelites in the Bible. Maybe this, you know, people wouldn't make that up. You wouldn't use that name, or you wouldn't have the Midianites be the friends of the Israelites in the Exodus story, and then everywhere else are the enemies. There must be something. Maybe that small group, that Moses group, maybe they really were like, you know, aided by the Midianites, and so they got the name of the God that freed them from that. Right, so this is the kind of thing that Lofink is pointing out too, and he focused on the names of God here. He says that Israel, the early period was called God was called El. That's what Israel means, struggles with God, right? And Israel, so you have that name El, which is the Canaanite name. That's a Canaanite. That's the head god of the Canaanite family gods. So the fact that they're using the same name shows you, yeah, a lot of these were, you know, Canaanite dropouts from the Canaanite city-state system, or in some case, slaves who had revolted against the Canaanite city-state system. Right, so that's where you get the name El, God. The other thing he points out here that he thinks really supports the idea that, you know, Israel was this kind of like motley crew of different tribes that ended up coming together under the Yahweh story, the Yahweh narrative, was that Israel also had a deep-seated aversion to the monarchs. Right? They were very anti-king, especially if you read Judges. You know, in Judges there's a scene where they try to make one of the judges, Gideon, the king, and he's like, no way, God's the king, right? And even when the people ask Samuel to anoint a king, he says no, because God's supposed to be the only king. They're supposed to have a king, right? And he warns the people. He says, you get a king, he's going to oppress you. And God even has to tell him, he's like, no, don't worry, Samuel. Like, they're not rejecting you by asking for a king. They're not saying you're not good enough as a judge, so we need a king. They're rejecting me, right? Like, they don't trust me enough. They think they need a king, right? So there's a lot of anti-monarchical sentiment, even in the Bible, right? And even in the parts where they're anointing the first kings. Anyways, move on. You got the name El from the Canaanite farmers. Where did Yahweh come from? Well, probably it looks like it came from a desert group. So it looks like you had various desert groups with values that are associated with desert cultures coming in, right? So there was an Abraham group. There might have been an Abram group too, right? And so they kind of maybe they were related but kind of distant or something. Or then you had the Isaac group and a Jacob group, right? And so you had these different groups come in, and they all kind of joined together, particularly under the story from the, we'll call it the Moses group, right, or the Exodus group, with this God Yahweh who freed the poor and the oppressed. So they start to assemble. They start to become a confederation of tribes, right? And they share each other's experience, especially faith in this God Yahweh, who who hears the cry of the poor, right? This great line in Exodus where it says, "And God heard the cry of the Israelites and knew." Right? Here's a God who cares about people being abused, people being oppressed, right? The people that don't have rights, the people that there's no one looking out for them. Who's looking out for them? Right? The help of the helpless. Right? God. You see, Yahweh here was the opposite of the oppressive Canaanite city-states and their gods, which solidified the oppressive actions of the kings. It was the opposite of that. They had rejected those gods and left those cities, and now someone comes in with a story of a God who, well, is looking out for people like that. And so you can see why they chose Yahweh. As it's put in Joshua 24:15, you have this remnant of the historical experience of the people where they're actually choosing to be God's people, right? They're saying, yeah, this hits home, right? When we back in the beginning of the course, we were talking about Ratzinger's experience, right? You take the word of someone else, right, of an authority, and then that's also kind of validated by the group that also approves that word, and then have your own experience, right? So these Canaanites, ex-Canaanites, they had the experience that they were also delivered, that they were helped, that they escaped slavery in Canaan. And so when the Moses group comes in and can put a name to it, right? Bam! That of course that's their God. That God has revealed Himself to them too, right? And now that they have someone who can put it into words for them, help them understand what's going on, of course they're going to recognize that truth. And that's exactly what it was. It was a new people, right? They were newly gathered. They were free, right? They weren't oppressed. They weren't coerced anymore. They were free to live together. They were free to help each other or not, right? There's no central government. There's no social stratification. No one's making them help each other, right? It's not a political state. What you have is self-sufficient extended family tribes who chose to help each other when they needed it. That's what the judges did. They rallied up armies from the other tribes. Not people who were conscripted by the king and forced to be in the army. but everyday farmers and herders, right? And they said, and maybe even some people who were kind of like professional thugs, right? Maybe even some marauders. Those people were, those guys, those tribes were ready to go, right? And they would defend the other tribes. This is what the judge did. He was a charismatic leader who could get other people to join in. You know, put down your plow for a while. Come on, we got some problems over here. Help us out, right? And there was this strong sense of community between the tribes. You know, we're different people. We're a free people. Our God cares about cares about all the human beings, right? He didn't just create the kings and the other gods, right? He created all of us. We're all in His image and likeness. And they had common festivals that brought them together. They have that narrative of Yahweh saving them all, right? They all shared in that. The other thing they had was a strict separation. The Canaanite ways were bad, right? You see constant condemnation of Canaanite rituals in the Torah. The social stratification, everything associated with the Canaanite city-states, those societies of oppression are to be avoided, right? And they also have a common ethos, right? This is how we do things in Israel. So the point that Ofink finally makes here is they were living in the beginning kind of like they were living in the exile, right? After the monarchy collapsed and they're just out there, guess what they are? You know, they're in Babylon, but they're still kind of living as Israelites in Babylon. What's going on? They're stateless, right? They're a society among nations, but they don't have their own nation. They don't have their own state. But guess what? Neither did they in the beginning, right? Which you might say is a lot closer to the way they lived in the beginning was a lot closer to the new city of Revelation, right? And the Garden of Eden, the paradise images that we have. It was a lot closer to that in the beginning. That's when they were really free. You know, it was a mistake. Once you got the king, you're not free anymore. So Lofing goes to point on that like Israel's always needed the gathering because Israel's always been like a loose confederation. It could fall apart at any moment, right? Even and when they got the monarchy, it didn't last that long. They split within a couple hundred years. So this gathering, this coming together, like this has always been an important function of being the people of God, and that's what we see today in the ecclesia, the assembly of the church. We say it right in the Eucharistic prayer. Father, you are indeed holy, and all creation rightly gives you praise. All life, all holiness comes from you. Through your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, by the working of the Holy Spirit, from age to age you gather a people to yourself, so that from east to west a perfect offering may be made to the glory of your name. You see what's going on there? Right? It's the gathering that is the reconciliation. That is the action. We're practicing, we're putting into practice, we're realizing the heavenly Jerusalem, right? We're realizing the new society, the better way. And you do it, right? You come in there, let's say you go to church with all kinds of people, right? Now, so my daughter says, Dad, I'm bored in church. I say, it's okay, we're all bored together. That's the point. We're to do it together. Right? To function as one people. The people of God cannot exist without constantly gathering from all the corners of the universe. It cannot live without constantly reconciling itself. That's what we do. That's how we live the life of love and service to others. By coming together, right? And I'm not just talking about Mass, right, or your Sunday church. It goes together, doesn't it? to reconciliation. So Lofink makes a final point here. He says sometimes people talk about the gathering that we do as ecclesia, as church, is that we gather together so that we can go out and serve, right? Like we come together, remind ourselves of what we're doing, and we go out and live the mission, right? And he says that's not quite it, right? We don't gather so we can reconcile, gather so we can live the mission. Gathering is the mission, right? Gathering is an act of reconciliation. The gathering should be the mission of service to others, right? This is what it heals the separations and divisions of the world when we come together as church, right? I mean, I guess the metaphor would be like, okay, let's say we came together, we reminded ourselves of who we are, right? We're Christ's body on earth. So then we're going to go make some food and we're going to bring it out to the homeless people in the parks, right? That's good. But that's one. But the gathering, the kibbutz, is if we would go get the people in the park and invite them to our barbecue, right? And then our barbecue is just a feast, right? Gates open. Remember the city, the heavenly city, the New Jerusalem? Gates are open. You can see right in there, right? Anybody who wants to come can come. And the people that are there are having such a good time they don't even know what time it is anymore. Right? I mean, it's not just doing an act of charity to a stranger. It's coming into intimate relationship with others, right? Like I see this a little bit at my parish when we go and we eat the Eucharist together, right? And everyone's doing it together. And that's nice. But then afterwards, we go to coffee and donuts, which is oftentimes extended into some kind of breakfast foods or something. And that's really where my family started, where we've met people that we become friends with, that we've been able to help out, and they've been able to help us out with the everyday challenges of life. We become friends, we become family. That's what Lofink's talking about. He says, in the Bible, the prophets and the apostles are sent precisely in order to gather the people of God. For only a people of God that has allowed itself to be gathered in unity could convince the world, right? It's when people see the community of intimate relationship, the community of people that treat each other like trusted friends, not like competitors, right? Not like a threat. That's the real gathering. That is salvation. That is the new and better life.